you're all set.
Well, good morning, everyone. I want to call to order this meeting of the Pension Crisis Task Force. Molly and Aaron, I don't know if we need to go around. I don't know if it's for the record, if we can just note the attendees and panelists within the list that we have as well.
Sure, I'm glad to do that, Mr. Chair. The list on my screen has Comptroller Aichasawa, Beth Cleary, Carmela Patty, Jerry Allen, Jomar Hooper, John Barmore, Mark Pelzek, Mary Reevy, Mayor Barrett, Nicole Fleck, Alderman Kolbach, Molly King and Patrick McLean, and Ron Roberts. Just for the task force's information, both Andy Wagner of the Police Association and Mike Bongiorno of Local 215 Firefighters Union were not able to attend today, but they did share a lot of very thoughtful and helpful feedback on the draft report.
Awesome. And I want to thank you and the City Attorney's Office for being able to put together a report in such a quick amount of time based upon the conversations that we have had, you and the team, you, Molly, and the team, based on the conversations we've had over the last couple of meetings. So I really appreciate that effort from the administration and from the City Attorney's Office. So I don't know, Aaron, are we kicking it off with Mayor Barrett at this point with some comments?
I think so.
Yep. First, I want to thank everybody who's been involved in this, and we know that there is a tremendous amount of work to be done here. But I felt in putting this together, it was important for us to have our local stakeholders sit down and at least discuss the different options that are on it. I'm hopeful that as we move forward, I'll be able to come up with a package that we can get agreement on. Now, I say that knowing full well that parts that are going to be objectionable to everybody. And, you know, for example, the sales tax, we got to get the sales tax, the role that the different unions play in their contributions will be obviously a very difficult conversation to have. And the level of services going forward. So it's a complicated problem. It's a very real problem. And that's why I felt it was so important for us to bring people together. My biggest concern right now is what traction, if any, we're going to get in the state legislature. In conversations I've had with some of the key members of the state legislature, they're not optimistic. They're not giving me any reason for optimism moving forward. And I'm telling you, the next budget is going to really be a problem if we don't have some options on the table. So that's what I say. There's a lot of work that remains to be done. That's what I'm referring to. But again, I am so thankful that all of you have taken time out of your busy lives to be part of this. And I think it's an accelerated schedule. But I want to, again, shout out Jomar. I also want to thank Aaron and just yeoman's work putting it together. So a big public thank you to Aaron and Jomar. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Jomar.
Thank you, Mayor Barrett. We appreciate your leadership on this issue, and it's obviously something that we have taken seriously as the committee and have had some great conversation around. And hopefully, we can really have an opportunity today as we move on to some discussion around the actual meat within the report to talk a little bit about the task force report and just review it a little bit. But before we start, I think we want to level set a little bit about the report. I think that we've had some feedback and some discussion via email. I know Aaron has had with a couple of the members, some folks who aren't here today, about some of the language that we've used inside of it. And I just think I want to kind of offer a point of reflection as we move forward in the report, and maybe some way that we can tweak some of the language. I know Aaron had mentioned in an email sent out this morning to some folks, but how do we talk about it not being necessarily recommendations from the task force? I think there's some issue around consensus of the issues, because we know that the issues laid out within the report are very controversial. Some of them are going to could potentially land us within litigation. And I know that the different constituencies that we had as part of this conversation, it's not 100% agreement on how we move forward on any of those particular issues. So in speaking with Aaron, we talked about potentially changing the term consensus and taking that out of the document and reflecting that this document is more of a presentation of options and ideas for actions than actual recommendations from this specific body. So I just want to throw that out there and see if anybody has any particular concerns about moving forward in that direction before we start talking about the rest of the report. But I think that that's a way for everybody who has been a part of this to feel like it's something that they can sign off on, and that it's a document that we all can feel that we're not really signing off on any specific option item at this point in time, but that there's going to be options that the city's going to be looking at moving forward.
This is Carmelo.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I didn't have an opportunity to respond back to Aaron via email within the 24 hours. So I just had a couple, maybe things to just to throw out there. There's been a lot of presentations during this process, and there's been some feedback back and forth in discussion, but in general, it's been a lot of presentations and information for us to consider based on a lot of that information. So one of the things that brings us to this point, I guess, if you look at the executive summary of it, that's kind of what I'm going off of, at least to start off with, is why are we here in the first place? And the reality of why we're here is there's several reasons, and it goes long standing. There's a lot of, there's decades of reasons what brought us to this point that we're at today. One of them is not meeting investment return goals by using a higher or inflated discount rate over, over many years. Even though those rates were, not necessary, meeting an 8.5 return rate really wasn't realistic. So, those are contributing factors to why we're really here in the first place, which contributed to an underfunding policy. There's another piece of this report that goes into later on that involves the smoothing process. That smoothing process was put in place to assist the city in giving the city the ability to fund and forecast a consistent payment to this plan versus having, significant variations in their contribution from year to year. And I'll just use an example of 20 million one year and 100 million another year. And having, understanding that it would be difficult to budget a 20 million payment one year, 100 million another, whatever, 120 the next, and then 40 the year after that. Having some stability on the city side, end of the equation for their contribution, certainly was understood and appreciated at the time by the board. I think that was in 2013 when that came to be, versus having substantial swings in its contribution. One year having a hard time figuring out how we're going to make a large payment, and next year maybe we don't have that large of a payment to the plan. So those are some of the, more basic reasons what brought us here to the first place, but it goes back a long time. I do like the fact that you changed during the ideas for action. I like that was changed, and items to consider versus the consensus, and I appreciate that for whoever made those suggestions and got back to you in a timely fashion. So number 3 on that page regarding items for consider, I just want to point out that number 3 is required. So it's not something really to consider as an option. It's more what we need to do here to accomplish this goal. This is a law currently under state law, and I believe it was put into place in 1937. So it's not really part of an item to consider. It's what we need to do to get to that point. So I don't know how if you want to clarify that, or, you know, where you want to put that in the report, but I think that's a different distinction, and it is significant that, you know, it's really not something to consider because it is a current state law, which also is, you know, embodied in the city charter. So I don't, as items pop up, I have some notes on my draft report, but I just kind of wanted to kind of at least get you to understand at least where my mindset is at the beginning of this report. So thank you very much. I appreciate you allowing me to speak.
No, thank you, Carmelo. That was really good feedback. And I think on your last point, and Aaron, this is just a suggestion. We could change that some language in that one to maybe say specifically determine what the reduction in city services and staffing needed to ensure. That way it shows that we'd have to, instead of saying, since we know we're going to have to do that if that's the case, but it shows that we're going to be determining what that looks like. I think we've spent a little bit of time talking about that, and, you know, we came up with a 1,300 employee figure, but, you know, to really dig down a little deeper on what the service level would look like, I think that could be added to the recommendation on that point, per what Carmelo just said.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
without getting into any of the recommendations, because we could spend all day arguing about them, and I've kind of said my piece on which ones might work and might not. And to be frank, I wear two hats as an alderperson and as a pension board member, and I might even disagree with myself depending on which hat I'm wearing, given my fiduciary obligations I have and other obligations. But just in general, speaking in general, that was the one sentence in the whole report I found jarring. Before I finished the sentence, and it said the task force identified 12 consensus, and I went, whoa. Now, if you finish the sentence, it's consensus recommendations for the mayor to consider. And so by the time I finished the sentence, I thought, well, I guess that sort of makes sense. But yeah, I would say the word consensus and the word recommendations are both potentially problematic. And maybe just say 12 possibilities to consider. Just call them possibilities, we could argue about whether they're definitely, I mean, the state mandates we got to make the payments currently, or the combination of state law, city charter, and union legal agreements say we got to make these payments. How we find the money to make the payments, I don't think there's specific state law, but I could be corrected on that. We got to find the money somehow. The most obvious way is to spend less money, but the borrowing is on here. I don't like increasing our borrowing for a lot of reasons, but I don't think we're prohibited from doing that by law. But I think some actions we take we might bump into state law on. So I think in general, this explains, and very good work from Patrick McLean and Aaron Chapinski on summarizing in I think a pretty factual and relatively neutral way, you know, pros and cons, or just maybe not even pros and cons, but just necessary eventualities of any of these possibilities. So I don't think the purpose of this task force is to decide among them, but merely to outline them. And obviously the mayor, the council, and the pension board, and the unions, and even the state legislature will all be involved in making some or any of these come true. And so anyway, that would be my one comment. Call it possibilities, not recommendations. And I guess hopefully there'll be a consensus to approve this report today as a factual document to guide us going forward. But I don't think anyone's claiming this is really a recommendation, unless I'm wrong.
Nope, those are really thoughtful comments, Alderman Kovac, and I think that's the direction we want to head. So that is definitely not things that, again, it's a lot of heartburn in this document, and definitely not things we want to recommend, but they're just all options, and again, not consensus options as well. So we do plan on, Aaron's making a note that we will be changing the language at the beginning of that when we talk about what this report is and what it's supposed to do as we move forward. Any other thoughts from the rest of the committee around the report that we need to discuss today?
Mr. Chair, John Barmore.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I had communicated with Aaron that I felt the bullet point on pension obligation bonds did not include my suggestions that I had submitted. So if I could take a minute to explain that. Mr. Sapinski said he would include it in the report. It's related to borrowing, but it is not the long-term pension obligation bonds. My suggestion was for the city to consider borrowing the next 5-year contribution required in whole at a present value discounted rate, and then paying that borrowed money back and contributing it to the fund and paying it back over the same 5-year period. The reason that would be advantageous is you're leveraging or you're arbitraging the difference in the discount rate of 7.5%, which is a soft debt that's been identified, compared to what the borrowing cost would be, was probably somewhere in the 3 to 4% range. So if the 5-year contribution was, for an example, $750 million, you may only have to borrow somewhere in the neighborhood of 675 would be your total payback cost, realizing a gain. So with that said, it's an idea, it's not a recommendation, it's probably not even a consensus, but I would ask that the city actuary model that and make it part of the report so there's a real number to look at. Thank you.
And John, I think it's fair for that to be added as a part of the conversation under that bullet point number 7. And I think we can count on Aaron and the city attorney's office to wordsmith that as we move forward as well too.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Jerry?
Hi, thank you. I did make a comment to Aaron yesterday, and I just wanted to bring it before the group because I think it's an important item. The item that talks about moving the new employees, the new hires to the WRS, there was a statement in there that the cost percentage of covered payroll is less than the WRS than it is in the ERS. I did ask Aaron to make a clarification that those are not apples to apples comparisons. The WRS includes overtime pay in their covered wages, and the ERS currently does not. Okay, so I think hopefully, Aaron, you'll make that clarification, because when you do that, I think you'll find that the costs are very much comparable to each other. The WRS does have some fine risk-sharing features. Employees have to pay half the cost of the normal cost of the plan. The WRS does not have any unfunded liability, unlike the ERS, which has substantial unfunded liability. But employee contributions are set annually as 50% of the cost of the normal cost, which is the cost of earning a benefit each year. And also, there is no formal cost of living adjustment annually. There's what I refer to as a dividend. The members and retirees of the WRS get to share in the progress of the investment return of the fund. Those are significant and valuable cost sharing aspects of the WRS that program has received national acclaim because of that. But when you boil it all down and you look at the cost of the benefit as a percentage of payroll, it's important to make sure that you're comparing it apples to apples. And when you take into account the fact that they cover overtime and we don't, it's probably less than 1% difference between our two plans. And I just want to make sure, and I actually, my suggestion here for Aaron is, as you go forward, and this came actually from Larry Langer, our actuary, that before you make any real decision about this, you should ask WRS actuary to model what the cost would be if the ERS or if the Milwaukee people would join. Our actuary is not in a position to do that. He doesn't have the data that is available to WRS actuary. So it's before you pull a lever, understand what you're signing up for. That's his recommendation. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on complicated pension inside baseball, but thanks for the forum. I appreciate it very much.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Go ahead, Aaron.
So thanks for that, Jerry. And I did take all of the submissions, comments, feedback that were shared back on the draft and incorporated them in. I think the chair talked about the biggest one, and that ironically is a consensus item, that we don't necessarily have a consensus out of the task force, but we do have a list of ideas to look at. So Jerry, I did make all the changes you sent. I added some submitted by the city attorney and incorporated all the feedback that I got on the draft into the final report.
And to that point, Aaron, I think I'm trying to remember if it's where it's at in the document or if it's in there. if we could add a statement saying something to the extent like these are each of these potential items are going to take a significant additional research and deliberation on from the bodies. I think we have it in there somewhere. But also talk about, maybe make sure we add ERS in that conversation and WRS as a part of that too. The floor is open if anyone else from the committee has any overarching thoughts about the report as well.
Mr. Chair, John Barmore.
Go ahead, John.
Quick question for Aaron and I guess yourself. Will the committee receive the final report before it's released as a public document?
Absolutely. I think the mayor, as he said, really wanted everybody with a stake in this to be a participant, have their views aired and included in the report. And we want to make sure that if this is going out with everybody's name on it, that you all know what's in it and are comfortable with what's represented there, knowing that, as the chair mentioned before, this isn't necessarily a consensus approach or full recommendations on a path of action.
All right.
So yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Yep. And just for everybody's benefit, one other member is not able to attend today, Gina Spang, and Mark Nicolini is on, but is having some problems unmuting himself to share some input.
Now.
Oh, he's here. Okay, great.
Thank you. No, I was just wrestling with trying to get in. If I may make one follow-up comment.
Yep, go ahead, Mark.
I thought John Barmore's suggestion is well taken. I didn't see the actual reprint of what he wanted. My only suggestion would be, maybe consider up to that total amount. I think there'd be some difficulties, and perhaps if the amount was, 5 times $50 million or whatever the extra amounts the city needed were borrowed. But I think it could make some sense to consider. It's really similar to what we've been doing on an annual basis to save money, on the annual contribution. But we're then coming up with the full amount in cash, basically to pay it off. Just a 5-year note. But anyway, that's just wanted to say, build some flexibility into that recommendation. I was thinking, for example, if the infrastructure bill ever does get passed, and if it allows the city to in fact make progress on its capital program, I'm not suggesting a cutback to the city's capital program, but perhaps there's a way the federal money will allow the city to get ahead or catch up. And then some of that capital borrowing for at least a short period of time could then be reallocated to this operating need. I don't know if Mr. Yacarino is listening, but that's just a thought that I did have that was similar to what Mr. Barmore is talking about. So thank you for letting me butt in there. Still learning this technology after 4 meetings. So thank you.
Well, thank you for those comments, Mark. Just want to keep the floor open for another minute. If anybody has any other additional thoughts around the report.
This is Carmelo again.
Go ahead.
I just had one other comment. I guess it's the way that maybe I read this piece. It's on the bottom of page 3, item number 2. It says that the ratios in the preceding paragraph were tied more than anything to investment performance. And the way that this worked from 2009 to the present, dropping from 81 or 84% respectively, is I think is ultimately inflated discount rate. And so a reader would read this, something in this fashion to say, look back and go, what was wrong with the investment performances and where did those go wrong? And I think that if you're saying more than anything, I think maybe that term, you know, obviously investment performance is a factor, but to say more than anything, you know, you could start pointing all kinds of things out, but more than anything, if the discount rate would have been set to a more appropriate level that was closer to its peers at those points in time, the contribution, and I'm just mentioning this, I know you can't go back in time, but to put the context together is that if you would have had if the fund would have had a discount rate that mirrored closer to its peer groups over those last 12 years or so, then the investment performance would have more likely been closer to its benchmark of its peer performers than anything else. I guess maybe that's just that terminology is what is troubling me to reflect that compared to other factors, which there are some. Then I think that discount rate is a significant factor to what led to, or is a contributing factor, I guess, to the point in time that we're at. So it kind of goes back what I said earlier, but it's repeated here, and I guess I felt it necessary to repeat that position. So again, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamal.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jerry Allen. I'd like to add some support to what Mr. Patty is saying. For the benefit of all the members, and this is again inside pension, paying, accounting, and actuarial science, so I'll try to keep it simple. The discount rate is in fact the yardstick for measuring the liability. And it's also not just the liability, but it also largely determines what the employer contribution has to be every year. So in the Dropbox, I put a slide deck back in June, and one of the slides shows what has happened with this yardstick, the discount rate across the board with many pension plans around the nation. When I first joined the city and the ERS 13 years ago, it was very common for the discount rate to be 8% and above, and the ERS was part of that. Our 8.5% discount rate was first put into place in 1990, but since that time, it's shifted. You can see in that there's a slide in there. Everybody can look at it, and what's happened is the average has gone from about 8% down to 7% over that period of time. And it's been a long discussion over the last 10 years or so in the community, financial economics community. Number one. Number two, as far as reference to investment return, there's also another slide in there. And I know that Aaron has included this in the final report. Our investment return over the last 20 years pretty much mirrors that of the Wisconsin retirement system. So there's really nothing wrong with the investment return. It's not what's driving this problem, right? Mr. Patty is right that the discount rate is the yardstick that is used. And when you reduce that discount rate, which is the same thing as the expected return on the fund, then the liability is going to grow and the contribution is going to grow. And that's what's happened. The rate has been coming down, and especially came down 0.75% in 2018. And that's what's created this unfunded liability and is causing this contribution to spike up beginning in 2023. So I guess if you want to, I'm not saying you should change anything in the report, but I want to mislead people about the investment return is actually very good compared to other things. But the real reason the city is in this pickle is because effective returns have come down, not just for us, but for everybody in public pension land and private pension land too. So maybe Aaron, you and I could talk about if there needs to be any clarification about that.
So I think I heard pretty clearly what Mr. Patty and Mr. Allen said, and I think there's a way to reflect that. I think it's a fair point from Carmelo, and I think Jerry has some of the nuance for it. So again, we'll make sure that the final report and the language on that gets out to all the members so everybody can put eyes on it and find these things and make sure that they're clear and inclusive.
Thank you. I guess in the interest of time, I just want to ask the task force, is there any major objections based upon the conversation that we had today around changing the language, around consensus, around recommendations? Are there any major objections to us presenting the report to the mayor as constructed based upon the changes that we're making today? And it does not sound like that there are any.
Can't find the report, so I don't know.
What's that, Mark?
Where is the final report? I saw a draft and commented on that, but never saw a final report. But
Well, Aaron will be circulating a final report in the coming days. Can't speak for Aaron, hopefully next week, based upon the changes that we made today and via email that we got from some of the participants as well, too.
okay, thank you. Since you got me, I was probably getting too deep into like technical issues, but I think for many years, Jerry's data records showed that actually our investment return exceeded, our discount rate or our assumed rate of return. But I think too, for many years, I think it still is systematically, I believe we've been overestimating our salary increases, which generally generates a higher than otherwise contribution amount. So maybe that's worth putting in if in fact that's the case. But
Thank you, Mark.
there's a lot of general employees who'd be a lot more flush if the actuary salary assumptions had actually come to pass. So anyway.
And Aaron, if there's any potential language from that piece that needs to go in, maybe you can connect with Mark around that too. Well, not hearing any major objections, I think we are okay with presenting this report, the final report, once it's all compiled and we've had a chance to review it to the mayor's office to proceed forward with. Mayor Barrett, I just want to throw it over to you to see if you kind of have any comments as we kind of get ready to close out.
Well, again, I want to thank you, Joe Meyer, everybody, Aaron, everybody. This is going to be an arduous process to try to address this. No question. And I appreciate hearing the comments from everybody on this call, because I think that everyone on this call is operating in good faith. And that's what we all have to do. Some of us have different interests than others. There are times when we're at odds with each other, but this is about the retirement, about the future of the city. And so I believe we have an obligation to try to work together. And even at those points where we can't work together, we have to keep our eye on the prize. And the prize is, how do we keep the city successful? How do we keep services at the level that the residents expect? And how do we make sure we're treating our employees very fairly? It's juggling 5 balls at once. But I think we have a much greater likelihood of being successful if we are united. And that means united in how we present these things to the legislature, because the legislature, if you look at it, as I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, here we're in this mess because the state is basically sitting on the largest surplus it has had in decades, and it has strangled the city fiscally. And so our inability to deal with these issues, because we're being strangled fiscally. And we can't allow our differences, which sometimes are significant differences, to get in the way of that reality. That our fiscal relationship with Wisconsin is broken. It's broken. And we have to work together to get that resolved. And this is a big part of trying to resolve that. So again, thank you to everybody, knowing that there's just a mountain of work that still has to be done.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Barrett. Well, with that, Aaron, just want to ask when, next week, just to double check, next week, we can expect to see an updated version?
Mr. Chair, I want to have this out as soon as we can. I think, as the mayor just said, we're really cognizant of the timing with the legislature. So, you know, I would ideally like to get that revised final report to the members today, once everybody, you know, affirms their approval and we have the language where you as the chair and all the members feel like it needs to be, then we'll officially communicate it from the task force to the mayor, and certainly I think share it out with the council and make it public as much as we can.
And for the task force, if you, once you get that, please take a chance to review it and send Aaron and myself any comments or thoughts or anything, omissions to the report as soon as you get an opportunity as well, too. And I guess with that, if there's no last thoughts from the committee, I think we can go ahead and adjourn this last meeting of the Pension Task Force.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.